Alright, YouTube, so I wanted to tell you a story. I consider this the biggest failure and my biggest mistake in my life, of my almost 20 years of existence on the planet. Kind of small, I guess. I guess the other mistakes would probably be my suicide attempt when I was a lot younger. I'm not suicidal anymore. And probably getting arrested for drugs. Getting into drugs in the first place. I talk about trip reports on my channel, but I really wish I hadn't taken drugs. But this would probably be in the top 3. And this story takes place throughout fall 2010 all the way to spring 2011. I was in 8th grade and I was 13 and 14. Basically, I was a 14-year-old to the nth degree. I was on the internet a lot, I was playing a lot of video games, and in my spare time I was probably masturbating to porn. So really, naturally, there'd be no time for homework. Now, I know a lot of people probably fucking did their homework late and rushed it, but I just didn't do the homework. You see, if there was maybe 100 assigned assignments combined throughout all my classes in one quarter, I probably did a quarter of them. So I probably do 25 out of 100 assignments. I was flunking tests, I was doing horribly, and it started out innocent enough. I knew my midterm was coming around really quick. Now, if you didn't have midterms in school, or if you're in school and have never heard of midterms, it's basically, think of it as the halfway point until you get the report card. You get this report, it's basically called a progress report, and if it's like 9 weeks, you get it around somewhere in the 5th or 6th week of that 9-week grading period. Now, it started out innocent enough, half innocent, I guess, because after that I told myself I would bring my grades up for the rest of the school year. I saw it at the time as like, oh, I'm just, failing miserably at this point. And I didn't know what to do because I didn't want to get in trouble. Half because, I didn't want to get grounded from masturbating, going on YouTube, or playing video games. And the other half, more so, I didn't really want to let my parents down. And this is probably the biggest impact. So, I had to devise a scheme, right? And I remember one night watching Max Keebler. It's this old movie about a rowdy kid who does all types of shady stuff. He's a schemer. I can't remember the full title of the movie, but it's Max Keebler. So I came up with something I called the Max Keebler plan in my head, and that's basically something I thought Max Keebler would have done. What happened was, this was one of my favorite movies. I was a good student until 8th grade, believe it or not. I had my ups and downs, but I was relatively a B average student. But 8th grade, it just flopped. So I watched Max Keebler and came up with this half-baked scheme. I said I was going to forge my midterm report, and then, after the midterm, I was going to go ahead and raise my grades up and act as if nothing ever happened. Maybe at a later date I'd reveal it. But what ended up happening was not that. After the progress report, I didn't realize that they called you for the progress reports and the report cards. They always call it at 7:10 p.m. I always remembered that. So, what ended up happening was my mom found out. She's like, why didn't you get your progress report? Are you hiding something from me? I said, no. So, that night, I forged the midterm report, I printed it, I folded it up and put it in my pocket the next morning. basically to throw them off my scent, my parents. And I brought it home the next day. And, I said after that scary experience, I wasn't going to do anything like that again. But I did it throughout the entire school year. And it was really stressful and really time consuming. I was playing this whole game, this whole strategy game in my head. Like, what's my next move? I was constantly in paranoia. What if one of my teachers contacts my father through email? What if one of my teachers calls the house? Because we had a landline at the time. So, I looking back, if I spent at least 30% of that energy actually doing the homework assigned to me, I probably would have had good grades in middle school, or at least 8th grade. So I timed it perfectly. It'd be at 7:10 p.m. and I'd answer the phone right when it rang. The first ring, I answered the phone. So in hopes that, because I had a phone in my house, because I used to have this friend, actually a best friend. His name was Tony, and he'd call a lot. So I just used the excuse that Tony called or something real quick. But they had the phone, like they had a landline in my house, or in my room rather, for that express purpose. If Tony called, I could answer the phone real quick and talk to him. I wouldn't have to run upstairs or do any of that stuff. So what ended up happening was I'd answer it right when it rang and then hang up, because I knew what the call was about. They'd call 2 times. The night before you got the progress report / report card, or the night of, the night of the day you got the progress / report card. Progress report / report card. So I always forged my report cards too. So I got good at this. I actually did it the night before, and I'd print it out. And I put the watermark down, and the only point I really messed up was I never really calculated the GPA, and because I never really looked on this program, which basically puts in your grades. I didn't really have access to it, and basically my parents thought, he's doing good, we don't even need to check on it. So I just fudge whatever number for the GPA. I put in some, you'd have a behavior and a, actual grade. But what happened was I'd print that out and then put it in my pocket and then take it back. Act like, I take it to the car and then blah, blah, blah. And I felt so bad after a while doing this, because my parents would go out and buy celebratory dinners. And, while this gave me the perfect opportunity to answer that phone call when it came at 7:10 p.m., I felt bad for it because, and I was scared. I was scared because, I did this because of 2 reasons, basically. I didn't want to be barred from internet, and I didn't want to be barred from playing video games, but more so, I didn't really want to disappoint my parents. I don't know why I didn't just do the work assigned to me. It would have been so much easier. My parents would have been so much more proud of me. But, it is what it is now. It's just a funny story now, but... So, after that all happens, the only scary moment during this, before the grand fail, was the printer wasn't working at the house. So I had to put it on a thumbstick, the Forge version, the Word file of the forgery, put that on a thumbstick, a USB drive, put it in a school computer and print it out. I got stopped by one of the ladies in the library, and she asked, are you printing homework? I said, yeah. She's like, let me see. I said, okay. She's like, this doesn't look like homework. I said, it's not homework. Because at this point I was like, oh shit. She's going to instantly know that, I am forging my grades. She's like, oh, you're just printing your grades, right? And I said, yeah. She's like, oh, that's okay too. Just only print out homework and grades. I said, okay. And I was like, whew, But what ended up happening, the grand falling apart of the Max Keebler plan, and I saw this coming anyway, was basically, I was in band, and we would, 8th graders, and I kicked myself because I wish I could have been able to do this, but 8th graders would go to the elementary schools, and they would perform pieces of music in hopes that eventually they get interested and join, band. So what would happen is they'd select music from the Mickey Mouse theme or the Star Wars theme or something like that. Of course, I didn't get to go, and what ended up happening was my band director at the time, he emailed my father saying, unfortunately, your son can't come on the elementary school tour. He has a few Fs. And my dad's like, what? And he's like, you need to get in here. And I've heard people say I puke when I am nervous, but I've never puked out of being nervous myself, but that was one time I was this close to puking because of nervousness, this close. But what ends up happening is they finally go on that grading thing, and they find out that this whole school year I've been lying to them. Or no, they don't even do that. They arrange a meeting with my school counselors, and they found out, and I totally made them look like dumbasses, because this whole time they were thinking that, hey, our son's getting A's and B's, and you're telling us that he's got F's. He's been getting F's the whole year. And she brings up the actual proof, and I wasn't there, but they turn pale, because they just realized that I've been lying to them for an entire school year that my grades were okay, or were great, really. And I remember getting reamed so hard about that, and basically my worst fear came true, disappointing my parents. That's one of my worst fears, and I felt so bad. And I tried running away, and my dad tackled me in the front yard, and I was crying for 30 minutes, and I had to basically tell them to their face when I got home that night in the living room up there that I lied to them the whole school year. And my mom's raving me. She's like, I did not raise a liar. I raised a person with integrity. I raised an honest young man. And I felt like shit. And I knew this would eventually fall apart. And I don't know why I didn't, work on my homework and actually apply myself. Because there's this program for 8th graders. It's rehabilitation summer school conducted at the high school in this town called Bridges. And basically, these are the rules that apply. If you have 2 Fs on your report card, academic classes, if you have an F in gym, they don't really care. But if it's you got an F in math and an F in English or something, you have to go to the high school and basically do this rehabilitation summer school program called Bridges. And I had this teacher named Mr. Hackett, and I got along with him pretty well. But what ended up happening, I eventually passed. I was in high school. But then I got arrested for drugs later my freshman year, and they were totally disappointed with me. Basically, the first 8th, 9th, and 10th grade, I was disappointing virtually everybody. School officials, parents, I guess I was going through an odd phase. But eventually I snapped out of that. But yeah, that is probably one of the biggest failures in my life. Looking back on it, it's pretty funny. But at the time, I still kind of cringe at it. But, who's a person without humiliating themselves, right? So that's about it, YouTube. Peace out.